National Archives and Record Administration still hasn't handed them over, so we don't know what Joe Biden was saying. We don't know why it was. Why is it? How did he determine when he used his real email and when he used the fake names Robin Ware, Robert L. Peters, or J.R.B. Ware? We haven't seen Joe Biden answer a question about this because the White House believes he's not accountable to the American people. And we've seen the corporate media completely silent on this. CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, NBC, they don't cover it. It's not news. Why? Because it counters their official propaganda line, and so they just utterly ignore it. But on its face, there is no legitimate explanation for this, and the Biden White House has not even tried to suggest a legitimate explanation.
Do you remember when the media freaked out, and I think it was on January the 6th, where they said that the White House was a cover-up of Watergate proportions, and there were missing phone calls that day from the phone logs, and then they had egg on their face, and they found out, no, he was just using his cell phone during that time, so those calls wouldn't have actually been on the official transcripts from the White House. They were talking about these missing periods of time. They lost their mind over that. Can you imagine if Donald Trump would have had alias email, like burner email accounts that he used while he was the president? Or anyone at the White House at any level of importance, they would have gone full-blown investigation into this.
Well, listen, if you use a burner email, a fake email, if you use a burner phone, as it's now been reported Joe Biden did, the natural implication is you're trying to hide something. You're trying to get around the law. There's a reason you're hiding who you are. If not, there's no reason to have the fake email. And again, the White House has not attempted to give any innocent explanation for this. And to be honest, I can't imagine what an innocent explanation would be. But their innocent explanation is, well, gosh, we're the White House, and so the media doesn't cover it.
It's going to be very interesting, Senator, to see how this plays out, because we do know the House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer, who we had on a two-part series here, and I'll say it again, if you missed it, go back and listen to what he had to say about the money coming into the family. But he has requested the archives hand over all documents and communications in which then Vice President Joe Biden used these names. You just mentioned Robert Peters, Robin Ware, J.R.B. Ware. The archives, he says, need to be transparent and provide these unredacted records to the GOP oversight. It will be interesting to see how this plays out. We're going to keep covering it for you. Senator, I also want to move on to something else, and I don't think people realize what a day in the life in Washington or a week in the life of Washington can look like when it comes time to vote on important legislation. There's a lot of it that happened recently, and we've had so much breaking news. We didn't get to talk about as much as I think we should have, and I want to fix that right now, because there were some big wins that you were leading on, legislation you were leading on for the people in Texas and in this country as well. Let's talk about how big these wins were right before recess.
Well, sure, and I want to focus on a single day, and that was Thursday, the last week of July, which is the last day the Senate was in session. We've been on recess for the past several weeks, and so I've been traveling across the state of Texas and doing events all over Texas. But the last day we were in session was the Thursday, the last week of July. And on that one day, I passed 8 separate pieces of legislation. It was a big deal to pass 8 pieces of legislation. There are a lot of members of the Senate that don't pass 8 pieces of legislation after years of serving in the Senate, and I passed 8 in a single day. And so I just wanted to walk through that day to get a sense of what can be accomplished fighting for Texas in a single day. So 2 of them passed out of the Senate Commerce Committee. And as you know, I'm the ranking member, the senior Republican, on the Senate Commerce Committee, and there were 2 different bills that I'd introduced, both of which passed the Senate Commerce Committee that day. One of them focuses on AM radio. We've talked about that bill here on this podcast before, which is that 8 automakers announced they were pulling AM radios off of brand new cars and trucks. I think that's a terrible step. It's terrible for a lot of reasons, including that it denies people disaster information in the case of a hurricane or fire or tornado or some other natural disaster. It hurts rural Americans who rely on AM radio, and it hurts conservative speech in particular. It's an example of corporate America silencing one of the most important platforms for conservative speech. Well, I teamed up with Ed Markey, the single most liberal member of the Senate, uh, in in legislation called the AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act, which mandates that new cars and trucks include AM radio. And that legislation passed the Commerce Committee, passed it with overwhelming bipartisan support. So that was victory number one, a big deal that impacts you. You have a radio station, a radio show. It impacts all sorts of people on the radio, but it impacts up to 80 million Americans who listen to AM radio every single month.
It's incredible legislation, and it's also, as you mentioned as well, a safety issue. You look at the hurricane that we're dealing with right now in Florida that's going to be going up the East Coast, and I've already heard it and talked to friends down there. They're already reminding people, grab your Crank AM radios to keep up when the power goes out so that you know what's going on. And I think there were many that thought of this as a way to silence conservative talk radio. Yes, there's no doubt there was a political side of this as well. But this other part was a safety issue. When hurricanes hit, when there's natural disasters that happen, and they're talking about it I was watching the Weather Channel today. The storm was developing, this hurricane and strengthening. They were saying, make sure you have your Crank AM radio. That is something that saves lives in situations like this. And that's also why it was so important to make sure these AM radios, because there are people after storms hit, and even before, they can go out to their car, turn it on for a second, listen to the latest updates of what's happening, and that's something that happens, or those Crank radios or battery-powered radios with AM. It's so vitally important for safety as well.
Yeah, and the other media often go down in the case of a disaster, so it's critical for getting people out of harm's way. A second piece of legislation that I authored that also passed the Commerce Committee that day is legislation called the Ticket Act, and it concerns if you go online and you buy sports tickets, you go buy baseball tickets or football or basketball tickets, or you buy concert tickets, you want to go see your favorite artist. All of us had the experience where you go online to buy tickets, you pick up your seats and you're really excited, and then you get to the final step of the transaction and you see fees that are just massive. The fees can be upwards of 40, 50, 60% of the total amount you're paying, and you don't learn until the very last step when you're entering your credit card. And so I joined with Maria Cantwell, the Democrat from Washington State, who's the chairman of the committee, and authored legislation that requires online ticket brokers to disclose the total amount of the ticket price with the fees up front, so that when you're searching, you can know, okay, if this ticket's going to cost me $100, I'm not going to think it's $50 and get surprised on the back end. As a consumer, I'm going to get to know up front and have the information to be able to comparison shop and make informed choices.
It is an important piece as well, because as you've mentioned, it happens so often where people get that in and then they're like, really, now this is what it is, and it's a surprise or a shock, and that's why there's another piece of just transparency. It shouldn't be this hard, by the way, to be transparent when it comes to basic things like this in commerce, and yet you have to spend time doing this, and that's going to help so many people that do tickets all the time in so many different venues all over the country and in Texas as well. I want to tell you real quick about our friends at Augusta Precious Metals, and if you have been watching what's going on in the economy, you've seen some of the big bank failures that have happened. You've seen interest rates that have more than doubled on homes. Now the highest interest rates on homes that we've seen in 21 years. We've seen inflation issues. Especially if you are close to retirement. That's why I want you to know about Augusta Precious Metals. They can help you protect your hard-earned dollars, your hard-earned investments, and that is why you should call them. They do things differently. It's really cool. Not only will they send you an investor's guide on gold so you can understand how gold can help you diversify and protect your assets, but they actually do a one-on-one web conference. They answer all of your questions. They'll talk about your segments, your investments, and tell you if a gold IRA isn't the right answer for you. You should check out what they can do for you at AugustaPreciousMetals.com. Call them right now, get the free investor's guide on gold, and work with a company that you can trust to help you protect your assets. 877, 4, GOLD-IRA. That's 877, 4, GOLD-IRA. Or online at AugustaPreciousMetals.com. That's AugustaPreciousMetals.com. Senator, you mentioned that there was not just these two pieces of legislation, but more than that happened on this single day. Walk us down that again, that path of what else happened.
Well, sure. The first two passed the Commerce Committee. The remaining 6 pieces of legislation that I passed that day all passed the entire Senate, the full Senate. And all of them on that day, the last Thursday in July, we passed the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the big bill that passes every year that authorizes the Department of Defense and our military, and it's critical for ensuring that we can defend our nation. And it is considered must-pass legislation, so that if you can author amendments that get attached to it, those amendments get passed into law and signed into law. I had 6 different amendments that passed on this year's NDAA. So one of the amendments I had was very focused on defense in the state of Texas, and it was ensuring that B-1 bomber remain in service for at least 3 more years, at least until 2026, until they're actually replaced by newer B-21 bombers. And this is critically important, number one, to preserve the U.S.'s long-range strike capability. But number two, many of those B-1 bomber wings are right now housed at Dyess Air Force Base in Abilene, Texas. And we're in the process of replacing B-1 bombers with B-21s. B-21s are much more advanced bombers, but it takes time to produce B-21s. And there's great concern, number one, in West Texas, that the B-1s will be taken down before they're replaced by the B-21s. And so there's been a battle year after year to make sure that we don't decommission the B-1s until we have B-21s in place to replace them. That battle's happened every year for a number of years, and I've managed to win temporary delays in it. This year we got a 3-year freeze, which is critically important for ensuring our defense capability, but also for protecting West Texas and Dyess Air Force Base. So a second amendment that also passed that day is legislation that I introduced that focused on what are called spy fridges, which is there are all sorts of appliances that you buy, whether they're refrigerators, whether they're microwaves, whether they're stoves or ovens, that are smart devices, and they have built-in cameras and or recorders. And often people don't know when you're buying a fridge, you don't think to ask, gosh, is my refrigerator recording me in my kitchen? And so I authored legislation. It's very, very similar to the legislation we talked about before in the Ticket Act. It's disclosure legislation that says if there's an appliance that's being sold to consumers that can record you, that has a camera, either a video camera, an audio recorder, that they have to disclose to you, the consumer, hey, your fridge is spying on you. And that likewise was bipartisan legislation. That likewise passed on the floor of the Senate.
Senator, did you ever think you were ever going to have to pass legislation that would tell consumers if their products would possibly spy on them? I mean, it does sound insane. It's extremely important. Did you ever think when you ran for the Senate that this would be something we would need and that fast forward to 2023?
It really is nuts, and it's where technology is taking us. It's where so much of corporate America violates the privacy of consumers. And look, the next time, Ben, you're walking to the fridge at 2 in the morning in your boxer shorts to get a midnight snack, just remember that video may be in the hands of whoever sold you the fridge.
Yeah, thank you for passing that. I do appreciate that. I think all of us can say yes on that one. What else was on the list?
All right, so 2 other amendments that both concern oil. One of them concerns Nord Stream 2. We've talked a lot about Nord Stream 2, which is the pipeline that Putin was building from Russia to Germany, and I had an amendment that holds accountable the corrupt officials who are responsible for building and maintaining Nord Stream 2, and so that passed as well. The second one.
Hold on, Tristan. I'll be right there. Give me a second, all right?
Our Strategic Petroleum Reserve.
I'll talk to you in a minute, buddy.
And as you know, Joe Biden has sold down our Strategic Petroleum Reserve to the lowest level it's been at in 4 decades. And the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is there to protect our economy, to protect our national security, to ensure that we have energy in a time of crisis. And Joe Biden's used it to try to temporarily lower gas prices right before the last election. He had a political benefit from it.
I'm listening to something, buddy. I'll be right out, all right?
And authored legislation to prohibit the federal government from selling oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve